The wind was a blade. It cut across the high plains of Wyoming territory, carrying the taste of iron and ice. The world was a smear of white earth and bruised sky, the mountains rising in the distance like smoky, broken teeth. Snow lay in thin, stubborn patches, clinging to the frozen ground and the dark bark of the pines. Clara ran. She did not know how long she'd been running. Hours, or perhaps only minutes. Time had frozen, then shattered, just like the carriage window. Her dress, a mockery of deep blue silk made for a parlor in Cheyenne, was ripped to shreds. The thorns of wild rose bushes had torn at the fabric, and the sharp edges of scree had bloodied her knees. She had left her shoes, flimsy things with pearl buttons, miles back, stuck in the mud of a half-frozen creek. Her feet were numb, wrapped in torn strips of her petticoat. But she did not feel the cold. All she felt was the fire in her lungs and the terror that pushed her onward. Behind her, somewhere, were the men, her husband's men. The carriage accident had been a blessing of jagged wood and screaming horses. It had happened on a steep, icy incline. She remembered the lurch, the guard's curse, and the moment she had thrown her full weight against the unsecured door, tumbling out into the snow just as the carriage splintered against a stand of aspen. She had not looked back. She had plunged into the forest, running from the life she had been forced into, running from the men who would drag her back to it. Now, the forest was thickening. The pines stood close, their branches heavy with snow, offering a grim sort of shelter. The wind howled above them. But here, on the forest floor, it was quieter. The only sound was her own ragged breath, steaming in the air, and the crunch of her makeshift bindings on the snow. She was failing. The adrenaline that had fueled her flight was turning to ash. Her body was spent, and the cold was beginning to seep past her fear, into her bones. She stumbled, falling hard against a drift, and for a moment, she considered staying there. It would be easy to close her eyes, to let the white silence take her. But the image of her husband's face, Alistair Finch, with his cold eyes and his soft, possessive hands, was worse than the cold. She pushed herself up. That was when she saw it. Through the curtain of falling snow, a thin curl of smoke rose against the gray sky. It was so faint, she thought she had imagined it. But as she moved closer, forcing her way through a dense thicket, she saw the cabin. It was small, barely more than a hovel, built of rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss. It looked abandoned, the burrow of a long-gone trapper. But the smoke was real. It came from a rusted stovepipe jutting from the roof. Hope and fear warred within her. A trapper, a band of road agents, or just a traveler, as desperate as she. It did not matter. She would die in the storm if she did not try. She approached the door, her hand raised to knock. But the wood was slick, and the door itself hung crooked on one leather hinge. She pushed. It groaned open, scraping against the rough floorboards. The cabin was empty. A wave of relief, so strong it made her dizzy, washed over her. The smoke was coming from the embers of a dying fire in a pot-bellied stove in the corner. Someone had been here, and not long ago. But they were gone now. She slipped inside, shoving the door closed against the wind. The small space was rank with the smell of old pelts, stale smoke, and something animal. A crude cot was built into one wall. A three-legged table lay overturned, and in the corner, beside the stove, was a small stack of firewood. Clara fell to her knees by the stove. It was still warm. She fed 2 small logs into its belly, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the latch. The embers caught, and a weak flame flickered to life. She huddled there, pulling her ruined dress tight. And finally, she wept. They were not tears of sorrow, but of a harsh, brittle relief. She was alive. She was free. She must have slept, slumped against the cold wall, exhausted past all watching. When she woke, it was to darkness. The fire had burned down again, casting only a dull red glow. The wind outside had risen to a terrifying shriek. A full blizzard had descended, sealing the cabin in a world of white noise. And there was a new sound, a heavy, stumbling step outside. A low curse, ripped away by the wind. Clara scrambled to her feet, backing into the darkest corner. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was back. The man who owned the cabin. The door flew open with a crash, blasting the room with snow and ice. A figure filled the doorway. It was a man, tall and broad, a silhouette against the swirling white. He staggered inside, slammed the door shut, and leaned against it, his breathing a harsh, wet rattle. He did not seem to see her. He slid down the wall, leaving a dark smear, and collapsed onto the floor. Clara stayed pressed against the logs, not daring to breathe. He was hurt. She could see the darkness staining his side, the way his whole body was clenched in pain. He lay still for a long count, and she thought, perhaps, he was dead. She crept forward, a shadow in the dying light of the fire. She had to know. If he was dead, she was safe. If he was alive, she had to— what? She did not know. She knelt beside him. He was covered in snow, his hat lost, his dark hair matted with ice and something else. His face was turned away, hidden in the shadows. "Mister," she whispered. Her voice was a dry crackle. The man groaned. He shifted, turning his head toward the stove's faint light. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The world stopped. The wind, the cold, her own escape. It all vanished. She knew this face. It was older, harder. It was carved with lines of hardship she did not recognize, and shadowed by a thick, untamed beard. But the high cheekbones, the straight nose, and the shape of his mouth, she would know them in her grave. "Jesse?" she breathed. It was impossible. Jesse Karen, the boy she had loved under a summer sky in a Colorado mining town. The man who had been arrested for her brother's murder. The man who had escaped his cell and vanished from the earth 7 years ago. He was supposed to be dead, or in Mexico, or hanged in some other territory under a different name. He was not supposed to be here, bleeding on the floor of a trapper's cabin in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her shock. This was not the boy she had loved. This was the man they called a killer. Her brother's killer. She scrambled backward, crab walking away until she hit the far wall. Her mind was a riot. She had to run, but the storm was a fortress. There was nowhere to go. His eyes snapped open. They were not the delirious eyes of a wounded man. They were sharp, focused, and filled with a burning, terrible light. The fever was in him, but beneath it, the wolf was awake. He stared at her, his gaze tracking her in the darkness. He did not seem surprised. He just watched her, his breath hissing between his teeth. "Clara," he said. His voice was a ruin, a low, gravelly sound that bore no resemblance to the clear tenor she remembered. Hearing her name from his lips felt like a violation. You're supposed to be dead," she whispered, the words sounding stupid and small. Jesse pushed himself up onto one elbow. The movement cost him, and a pained grunt was forced from his chest. He looked down at his side, at the dark, spreading stain on his heavy duster. Then he looked back at her. "Not yet," he rasped, though not for lack of trying. He was looking at her, truly looking at her, taking in the torn silk, the bare, bloody feet, the wildness in her eyes. His gaze was slow, insulting, as if he were appraising livestock. A bitter, cruel smile twisted his lips. "Running from him, were you?" he asked. "Running from Finch, your rich husband?" Clara flinched. "How did you know?" "I know everything, Clara." His voice was soft, but it carried a threat that chilled her more than the storm. "I know you married him, not even 6 months after I was gone. Did you even wait for the news to say I was dead? Or did you just take the best offer? You don't know anything." She spat, finding a sliver of anger. "You were a murderer. You killed Thomas." His face darkened. For a second, a flash of the old Jesse was there, the quick, hot temper. But it was gone, replaced by a coldness that was far more frightening. "You always did believe what you were told," he said. He began to drag himself across the floor, hissing in pain with every movement. He was moving toward the stove. Clara tensed, ready to bolt, but he ignored her. He grabbed the poker, his knuckles white, and jammed it into the heart of the embers, scattering sparks. The flames leaped up, catching the dry wood, and for the first time, the cabin was filled with light. She saw him clearly now. He was a stranger. The years on the run had stripped him of all softness. He was gaunt, but the width of his shoulders and the strength in his arms were evident, even through the pain. His clothes were the rough garb of an outlaw, worn denim, a thick wool shirt, and a gun belt, heavy with a revolver, still strapped to his waist. And he was badly hurt. The bullet had taken him high in the side, just under the ribs. It was a miracle he was still standing. He turned his head, and the firelight caught the planes of his face. He looked at her, and all the pretense of civility, all the memory of the past, was gone. His eyes were flat, dead. "Get over here," he commanded. "No." He pulled the revolver from its holster. The movement was slow, deliberate. He did not point it at her. He just laid it in his lap. A simple statement. "I'm not asking again. Clara." Her feet would not move. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but obey. But her body was frozen. This was Jesse, and he was not Jesse. He was a ghost with a gun. Slowly, she stood. She kept her hands visible, her back pressed to the wall, and edged her way along it, toward the fire. "Closer." She stopped when she was just out of his reach. She could smell the blood on him now, a coppery, sick, sweet smell, mixed with sweat and snow. He watched her, his eyes never leaving her face. "All those years," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I pictured this, pictured finding you. I thought I'd feel something, rage, or something." He shook his head. "I just feel tired." He reached for something in the shadows by the stove. Clara tensed. He grunted, pulling a heavy object. It was a length of chain, cuffed at both ends, coated in rust, old trapper's irons, probably for anchoring pelts or keeping a bear trap secure. What are you doing?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "You ran from him," Jesse said, his voice void of emotion. "You're not running from me." He lunged. It was shockingly fast for a wounded man. He grabbed her ankle, his grip like a steel trap. Clara screamed and kicked, striking his shoulder. He roared, a sound of pure agony, but he did not let go. He wrapped his other arm around her legs, and his weight, combined with her own off-balance panic, sent them both crashing to the floor. She fought. She clawed at his face, at his arms, at the hand that held her ankle. He took the blows, his face a mask of grim determination. He was stronger. Even wounded, he was infinitely stronger. He dragged her toward the stove. She kicked and writhed, but it was no use. With a brutal efficiency, he snapped one of the iron cuffs around her ankle. The cold metal bit into her skin. He looped the chain around the thick cast-iron leg of the heavy stove, then secured the other cuff, locking the chain in place. It was done in seconds. Clara scrambled away. As far as the chain would allow, it was perhaps 4 feet long. She was tethered, a dog. She stared at him, her chest heaving, her mind blank with shock and violation. Jesse Caron dragged himself back, putting a few feet of distance between them. He leaned his back against the cabin wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The effort had nearly cost him the last of his strength. His face was pale, slick with sweat. He looked at her, a prisoner at his feet. The firelight flickered in his dark, haunted eyes. There was no triumph in them, only a profound, bottomless emptiness. A brokenness that matched her own. "You're my bride now," he rasped, the words dropping like stones into the howling silence of the storm. "And this is your punishment." The words hung in the air, thick and poisoned. Bride. Punishment. The cabin felt suddenly smaller, the air too thin to breathe. Clara looked at the iron around her ankle, then at the man who had put it there, the boy she had kissed in a hayloft. The boy who taught her to skip stones was gone. In his place was this creature, forged by 7 years of wilderness and hate. Her memory betrayed her, offering up a flash of sunlit warmth. A mining town, the dust golden in the late afternoon. Jesse, his face clean and young, laughing as he offered her a wild prairie rose. He had been 19. She had been 17. They had promised each other forever, a simple, childish vow that meant everything. The memory shattered, replaced by the next. Her brother, Thomas, lying in the alley behind the saloon, his eyes wide and empty, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The shouting, the accusations, then Jesse, in the sheriff's custody, his face bruised, his eyes wild with betrayal as he looked at her, standing beside her father. "I didn't do it, Clara," he had yelled as they dragged him away. "I swear it, I didn't do it." She had wanted to believe him, but her father, her new suitor, Mr. Finch, the whole town, they had all said it was him, an argument over cards. They said Jesse's temper, and then he was gone, escaped, a full-blown outlaw. Her father had forbidden his name, and Alistair Finch had been there, offering stability, wealth, and protection. She had been a different kind of prisoner long before Jesse Karen found these chains. Now, in the cabin, the past and present collided with brutal force. She was trapped by the man she had been forced to betray, a man who now embodied the very violence he had been accused of. "Why?" she whispered, her throat raw. "Why are you doing this? Jesse?" He had closed his eyes. He seemed to be drifting, the fever and blood loss pulling him under. "Justice," he muttered, so low she almost missed it. "Someone has to pay." He was not just talking about her brother. He was talking about his own life, the 7 years stolen from him. He suddenly jerked awake, his hand going to his side. He ripped the heavy duster open, then tore at the wool shirt beneath. The firelight shone on the wound. It was a dark, ugly hole, bleeding sluggishly. "He almost had me," Jesse breathed, staring at the wound as if it belonged to someone else. Another inch. He looked around the cabin, his eyes settling on a small, rusted knife on the floor, left by the trapper. He reached for it, then grabbed the poker and jammed it back into the fire until the tip glowed orange. Clara watched, horrified. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning," he grunted. He took a ragged breath, pressed the flat of the knife against the wound, and began to dig. Clara cried out, turning her face away. He did not make a sound, save for the sharp, animalistic hisses of breath he took through his clenched teeth. She heard the wet tearing sound of his flesh, and then a clink as something small and leaden fell to the floor. He had cut the bullet out. He slumped back, his body trembling violently, but he was not done. He grabbed the glowing poker from the fire. "Don't," Clara begged, though she knew he would not listen. He pressed the searing metal to the open wound. This time, he screamed. It was a raw, terrible sound, torn from the depths of his soul. The cabin filled with the acrid smell of burning flesh. He held it there for 3 long seconds before throwing the poker with a clatter, his body collapsing in on itself. He was shaking, his face ashen, his eyes rolling back. He had pushed himself too far. Clara sat frozen, her ankle chained to the stove. The man who had just brutalized her, chained her, and pronounced judgment upon her, was now dying on the floor in front of her. A part of her. The part that belonged to Alistair Finch, the part that was numb and cold, whispered good. Let him die. Let this nightmare end. But the part of her that was 17, the part that remembered prairie roses and a shy, warm kiss, was screaming. He was still Jesse. She pulled at the chain, but it held fast. He was just out of her reach. "Jesse," she said, her voice small. He did not respond. His breathing was shallow. Outside, the blizzard raged. The wind no longer howled, it moaned, a sound of absolute desolation. The snow was piling up against the cabin walls, sealing the cracks, plunging the single room into a deeper, more profound darkness. The fire sputtered, casting long, dancing shadows. Jesse lay in a heap, his gun still in his lap, his hand resting on the grip even in unconsciousness. Clara pulled her torn skirts around her, the cold from the floor seeping into her. The iron cuff on her ankle was a heavy, cold reality. They were trapped, the hunter and the hunted, the judge and the judged, and the storm, indifferent to their small, violent history, held them both in its white, suffocating embrace. For 2 days, Jesse was a dead thing. He lay by the fire, lost in a fever that burned through the last of his strength. He was a ghost, muttering names Clara did not know, his body slick with a sweat that smelled of sickness and rust. Clara watched him from the end of her chain. Her anger, so cold and sharp, had given way to a dull, throbbing fear, not just of him but of the storm. It had not ceased. It was a living entity, a white monster that clawed at the cabin, piling snow higher than the small, filth-caked window. The wind shrieked, a constant, maddening sound that promised death. If Jesse died, the fire would die, and she would die, chained to a stove. A final, grim irony. On the 3rd day, his breathing grew shallow. It was a thin, wet rattle. The infection was in his blood. She looked at the iron cuff on her ankle. She pulled, testing it. The stove was heavy, but she was desperate. Grunting, she dragged the pot-bellied stove, scraping it 6 inches across the floor, then another 6. Her ankles screamed as the iron bit into her skin, but she did not stop. It took her an hour of agonizing, halting work, but she finally dragged herself. And the stove, close enough to reach him. He was burning. She touched his forehead, and the heat of it startled her. "No," she whispered, "to him, or to herself. You don't get to die, not yet." She found the trapper's water bucket. It was half full of ice. She broke it with the fire poker and tore a long strip from the hem of her ruined petticoat. She dipped the rag in the icy water and laid it on his forehead. He groaned, his head twisting away, but he did not wake. His wound, the one he had seared, was a blackened, suppurating mess. The smell coming from it was foul. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that if she did not clean it, he would be dead by morning. She steeled herself. This was not for him. This was for her. She would not die here. She got the water. She tore more strips of cloth, and, her hands shaking, she began to peel away the crusted, bloody remnants of his shirt. He was unconscious, his body limp, offering no resistance. The seared flesh of the new wound was terrible, but it was not what made her stop. It was the rest of him. His skin was a map of old violence. A puckered, silvery scar, the clear mark of a bullet, rested just above his collarbone. Another, a long-heeled knife wound, jagged and white, cut across his ribs and his back. When she rolled him slightly to clean the wound, she saw his back. It was cross-hatched with old scars, pale and raised, whip marks, dozens of them. Some were so old they were faint lines. Others looked newer, as if they had been laid down only months ago. Clara sat back on her heels, the wet rag dripping onto the floor. This was not the boy she knew. The Jesse she remembered had smooth skin and easy strength. This man had been captured. He had been caged. He had been beaten like an animal. A cold, confusing pity stirred in her. It was a dangerous feeling. It warred with the image of her brother's body in the alley. She finished cleaning the wound. It was an ugly, brutal task. She packed it with the cleanest rags she had and bound it tightly with strips of her dress. He shivered violently under her touch but did not wake. For another day and night, she tended him. She fed the fire. She dragged herself back and forth, bringing him water, cooling his head. She was an animal in a trap, tending to a larger, more dangerous animal caught in another. On the 4th day, the fever broke. She woke from a fitful doze to find him staring at her. His eyes were clear. The delirium was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp lucidity. He looked at his side, where her clean, white bandage was tied. He looked at the stove, now sitting in the middle of the room. He looked at the chain on her ankle. And then he looked at her. "Why?" he rasped. His voice was weak, but the edge was still there. "You were dying," she said, her voice flat. "I didn't want to be chained to a corpse when the fire went out." A cruel flicker of a smile touched his lips. "Practical. I'd forgotten that about you." He pushed himself up, hissing in pain. He sat with his back against the wall, his gaze sweeping the cabin. The storm still raged. "You saved me," he said. It was not gratitude. It was an accusation. "Wasted your time. I'm still your jailer." "I know what you are," she said, pulling her legs up, trying to find warmth. "Do you—" He coughed. The sound was deep and painful. "You look at me, and you see a monster. The man who killed your brother. That's what you are. And what are you, Clara, the grieving sister, or the woman who married the man who benefited most?" Her head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Alistair Finch," Jesse said, his voice gaining a hard, bitter strength. "You were always so smart. Don't tell me you never once thought about it. Your brother dies? I'm arrested. Your father, lost in his grief, signs over his mining shares to his new partner, Finch. And 6 months later, Finch marries the grieving daughter. It's a clean story." "You're lying," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow. She had thought it in the long, cold nights in Alistair's house. She had thought it. "I'm not—" "Your brother was a fool. He was stealing from the mine. He owed thousands to the railroad bosses, and he was losing at cards to Finch every night. He was a liability. So they cleaned the slate. You argued with him," she stammered, clinging to the official story. "The whole town heard you. You threatened him?" "I did," Jesse admitted. "I told him I'd tell your father what he was doing if he didn't stop. I was trying to save him. You damn fool. He was my friend, or I thought he was." He stared into the fire, his eyes dark with a past she had never known. "When I found him in that alley, he was already cold. I knelt beside him, and the sheriff was there. Not 2 minutes later, like he was waiting. It was a setup. Clara. From start to finish, they needed a scapegoat, and I was perfect. No family, no money, and a hot temper." He turned his eyes back to her. They were burning now. "But they made one mistake. They thought I'd hang. They didn't know I'd rather die fighting." Clara was silent. Her whole world, the one she had built on the foundation of his guilt, was tilting. She saw her husband's cold eyes, heard his dry, precise voice. "Your father was a poor businessman, my dear. He was lucky I was there to salvage the estate. And you?" Jesse's voice was soft now, but it cut deeper than his anger. "You just let it happen. You stood there, by your father's side, and you watched them drag me away. You never said a word. You never even looked at me. I had no choice," she cried, the old defense rising up. "I was alone. My brother was dead. You were gone. What was I supposed to do?" "You could have believed me," he said simply. "You could have asked one question. Instead, you married him." He spat the last word like poison. "You took the blood money and you wore it to your wedding." "You don't know anything about my marriage," she shot back, the shame turning to rage. "You don't know what it was like." "I know it was soft," he sneered. "I know you had silks and a warm bed. Do you want to know where I was?" He gestured to his back. "I was in a territorial prison in Utah. I was building their railroad for them. With a whip at my back, I ate rotten hardtack while you ate off porcelain. So don't you talk to me about what I don't know." The cabin fell silent again. The accusations hung in the air, thick and toxic. There was no answer. He was right. She had chosen safety. She had buried the truth because it was too terrible to face, and he had paid for it. The storm worsened. It became a prison of white noise. Days bled into one another, marked only by the meager light that filtered through the snow-caked window. They were trapped, the two of them, in a space no bigger than a grave. The food ran out. The trapper's small cache of jerky and beans was gone. Hunger set in, a dull, aching thing that sharpened their tempers. On what might have been the 6th or 7th day, Jesse stood. He was weak, his movements stiff, but the iron will that had kept him alive for 7 years was back. "I have to set snares," he said. He took the key from his pocket and, for the first time, walked toward her. Clara flinched, pressing against the wall. He knelt, the key in his hand. He did not look at her. He unlocked the cuff from the stove. Clara rubbed her raw, chafed ankle. She was free. "Don't get any ideas," he growled. Seeing the look in her eyes, he pocketed the key, leaving the heavy cuff on her ankle. A reminder. "The storm will kill you in 10 minutes, and I'm faster than you, even with one arm." He wrapped himself in his bloody duster, took the trapper's knife, and opened the door. The wall of snow was almost as high as his chest. He began to dig his way out, a man carving a tunnel out of his own tomb. He was gone for an hour. Clara spent every second of it by the door, her heart pounding. She could run, she could try, but she looked at the swirling, endless white, and she knew he was right. It was a death sentence. He returned, covered in ice, his face gray with exhaustion, but he held up a rabbit. They fell into a grim routine. He would go out, checking his snares, his revolver always at his belt. He would bring back what he could. He would skin the animals with his one good hand and his teeth, a brutal, efficient process she could not watch. She cooked. She found a small bag of moldy flour and mixed it with water and salt to make a thin, tasteless gruel. They ate it with the stringy, boiled rabbit. They did not speak. The cabin was too small. The intimacy was a torment. She could smell him, the scent of blood, sweat, and the cold outdoors. He slept sitting up, his back to the wall, the gun in his lap. She slept on the crude cot, the iron cuff a cold weight on her leg. One night, she woke. The fire was low. He was not in his usual spot. She sat up, her heart leaping into her throat. He was in the far corner, his back to her. He had the bucket of melted snow. He had taken off his shirt. Clara froze. He thought she was asleep. In the dim, red light of the fire, she watched him. He was washing, not just his wound, but his body. He scrubbed at his skin, his movement stiff with pain. His left arm was useless, tucked against his side. He washed his face, his neck, his chest, and then his good arm. Then he took his shirt, the one caked with his own blood, and began to wash it in the bucket. The water turned a dark, murky red. He was so thin, thinner than she remembered, but his back and shoulders were hard with muscle, corded from years of labor and fighting. The scars on his back looked like pale rivers in the firelight. He was a landscape of pain. He stopped, his hand still in the bloody water. He must have felt her eyes on him. Slowly, he turned his head, turned. Their eyes met across the small, dark room. It was a moment outside of time. There was no past, no future. There was no jailer, no prisoner. There was just a man and a woman. She saw the flash of heat in his eyes, a raw, undeniable recognition. It was the first human thing she had seen in him. It was followed, just as quickly, by a wave of profound, agonizing pain. He was exposed. He was vulnerable, and he hated it. She saw the man she had loved, and he saw the woman he had lost. He was the one who broke the gaze. He turned his back to her. A violent, sharp movement. A dismissal. He finished wringing out the shirt and put it on, the wet, cold fabric clinging to his skin. He did not look at her again. He went back to his spot by the wall, picked up his gun, and closed his eyes. Clara lay back down, but she did not sleep. Her body was trembling. That night, she dreamed. She dreamed of a hayloft, the air thick with the smell of sweet clover and dust. She was 17. Jesse was 19. He was smiling, his eyes clear and bright. He leaned in, his hand, so gentle, brushing the hair from her face, and he kissed her. It was slow and shy, and full of a simple, sunlit promise. She woke with a gasp, tears on her cheeks. The cabin was gray with morning light. Jesse was awake, cleaning his revolver, the pieces laid out on his knee. He was fully dressed, his demeanor as cold and sharp as the ice outside. He felt her stir. He looked up. His eyes were flat. The man from last night was gone. "Stop looking at me," he said. His voice was a low snarl. "I wasn't," she said, her voice small. "You were." He snapped the cylinder back into his gun. Stop looking at me like I'm something to be pitied or saved." "I don't," she whispered. "The hell you don't." He stood, his anger coiling. He was angry at her dream. He was angry at the kiss. He was angry because, for 1 second last night, he had felt something other than hate, and it terrified him. "You think 'cause you cleaned my wound and I haven't killed you yet, we're, what, friends?" He laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "You're still the woman who sold me out for a silk dress? You're still the whore who married Alistair Finch." It was designed to break her, to shatter the fragile thing that had passed between them in the night. But the woman who had survived Alistair Finch was not the girl he had known. She had a core of ice, forged in her own loveless prison. She stood up. "And you're still a coward." The word hit him like a physical blow. He went still. "What did you say?" "A coward," she repeated, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "You were a coward then. You ran. You didn't stay and fight for the truth. And you're a coward now. This punishment." She gestured to the cuff on her ankle, to the cabin. "This isn't for me. It's for you. It's the only way you can feel powerful. You lost everything, so you find a half-frozen woman and you chain her to a stove to feel like a man again." His face went white. The air crackled. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He did not stop. He slammed her back against the log wall, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. His face was an inch from hers. His eyes were black, the pupils blown wide. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the tremor of pure, undiluted rage shaking him. His left hand, the wounded one, was braced by her head, his right hand fisted in the torn silk of her dress, by her shoulder. He was not touching her skin, but he was pinning her, trapping her with his body. "Don't," he hissed, the word a vibration she felt in her teeth. "You ever say that again." It was all there, the desire from the night before, now twisted and blackened by his anger. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to kill her. The 2 impulses were so close. They were almost the same thing. He was at war with himself, and she was the battlefield. She was terrified, but she met his gaze. She would not look away. She would not give him the satisfaction of her fear. The moment stretched, taut and vibrating. The only sound was the wind and the ragged, harsh sound of his breathing. He looked at her mouth, and that, finally, broke him. He recoiled as if he'd been burned. He shoved himself away from her, stumbling back, his face a mask of self-loathing. Get away from me," he breathed, though she had not moved. Clara slid down the wall, her legs giving out. She was gasping, pulling air into her lungs. Jesse looked at his own hands, balled into fists, trembling. He looked at her, crumpled on the floor. He looked at the cabin, his prison. He could not be in this room. He could not be near her. The anger was too hot. The wanting was too raw. Without a word, he grabbed his blood-stiffened duster. He ripped the door open. The blizzard screamed into the room, a solid wall of white ice and wind. It was madness. It was suicide. "Jessie!" she screamed, scrambling to her knees. "No! You'll die! The storm!" He didn't look back. He stepped out into the howling white hell and pulled the door shut behind him, leaving her alone in the sudden, terrible silence. The silence he left behind was louder than the storm. Clara sat on the floor, the echo of the slamming door a physical blow. He was gone. He had walked out into a white, roaring hell, and he had done it because of her, because she had pushed him, had thrown his own brokenness back in his face. The thought, "He will die," was cold and sharp, and the next, "It will be my fault," was even worse. She spent the night in a new kind of prison. The chain was still on her ankle, but it was her guilt that held her. She fed the fire, her movements numb and mechanical. Every shriek of the wind sounded like a man's scream. She stared at the door, willing it to open, praying to a God she had long forgotten. She prayed for the man who had chained her, the man who had called her a whore, the man she had just sentenced to death. The hours crawled, the fire burned low, and she fed it the last of the wood. The cabin grew cold, The storm did not relent. By dawn, she had given up. He was gone. He was a frozen shape buried under 10 feet of snow, his anger frozen on his face. She would be next. The light was a pale, sickly gray. The storm, at last, seemed to be losing its fury. The wind had quieted to a low, keening moan, and then she heard it, a scraping, a heavy, collapsing weight against the outside of the door. She flew to it, her chain yanking her short. "Jessie!" There was a fumbling, a weak scratching. She threw her weight against the door, pushing it open just enough to see. He fell in. He did not walk. He collapsed onto the floor, a mound of snow and ice. He was encased. His duster was frozen solid. His hair and beard were a solid mass of ice. His face was a waxy, terrifying white. "No," she whispered. She grabbed him, her hands stinging as she touched the ice, and dragged him inside. He was a dead weight, barely conscious, his body shaking in great, violent shudders. She shoved the door closed. There was no protest in her now. There was no anger, no fear. There was only a cold, sharp desperation. She grabbed the trapper's knife. His duster was too stiff to remove. She had to cut it from him. She sawed at the frozen fabric, tearing it away. His clothes beneath were soaked and stiff. She cut them, too, stripping him down to the skin, his body pale and shivering uncontrollably. His hands were white and hard as wood. His feet the same. The cheeks under his beard and the tip of his nose were a dead, bloodless color. Frostbite. "You fool!" She wept, the tears hot on her own cold cheeks. "You stubborn, stupid fool!" She dragged him, his bare skin scraping the floorboards, as close to the fire as she dared. She took the last, threadbare blanket from the cot and began to rub. She chafed his skin, her hands moving with a rough, frantic energy. She rubbed his chest, his arms, his legs, trying to force the blood to move, to fight the ice that had stolen into him. He groaned, a low, animal sound of pure agony, as the feeling began to return to his skin, but he did not wake. She worked for an hour. She broke the ice in the bucket and, dipping her own ripped petticoat in, she began to gently, so gently, bathe his face and hands, not with hot water. She knew enough to know that would kill the flesh, just cold water to slowly thaw the ice. He was a ruin. The scars, the new wound, the raw frostbite. He was a man who had been taken apart, piece by piece, and she had just thrown him to the wolves. She wrapped him in the blanket, tucked it tight around him. She sat back on her heels, her body aching, her hands raw. He was breathing, a shallow, ragged breath, but it was steady. He was alive. He woke hours later. The pale gray light had brightened, suggesting the storm was breaking. He opened his eyes and looked at her. The anger was gone. The cold had burned it out of him. All that was left was a vast, hollow emptiness. He looked at his hands, red and raw, swaddled in strips of her dress. He looked at his bare chest, covered by the blanket. "You're still here," he croaked. "Where would I go?" she answered, her voice quiet. He closed his eyes. "Should have let me freeze." "I thought about it," she admitted. He was silent for a long time. The fire crackled. The wind moaned, softer now. "Why did you say it?" he finally asked. His voice was raw. "Because it was true," she whispered. "And because I was angry. You wanted to hurt me, so I hurt you." He nodded, a small, pained movement. "You did." The wall was down. It had not crumbled. It had been shattered by his pride and her cruelty. What was left was the raw, bleeding truth. They were just two people, trapped in a room, who had systematically destroyed each other. "I didn't want you to die, Jessie." He turned his head and looked at her. "I did," he said. "Out there, in the white. It seemed easy." He pushed himself up, wincing. The blanket fell away, and she saw the brutal red of his skin, the angry swelling of his hands. He ignored it. He sat with his back against the wall, pulling the blanket over his lap. "They teach you that in prison," he said, his voice a low monotone, as if he were talking to the fire. How to die, how to just stop. You see it in the men, the ones who give up. Their eyes go blank. They stop eating. A week later, they're in a pine box. I never let myself. I told myself I couldn't. Not until what? She asked. I don't know, he said. I thought, not until I found you, not until I made you see what you did. He laughed, a dry, broken sound. Now you're here, and I'm just tired. He began to talk. It was not a confession. It was an unburdening. The words came slowly, pulled from a place he had kept locked for 7 years. He told her about the prison in Utah, the lash marks she had seen. They were for an escape attempt, his second one. The first one, he had almost made it. They caught him, and they beat him, and they threw him in a hole for a month. He told her about starvation, about eating rats and roots and things he could not put a name to, just to stay alive during the winter he'd spent in the mountains after his final escape. And then, his voice dropping so low she had to lean in to hear, he told her about his brother. I had a brother, he said. Caleb. He was just a kid, 17. After I got out, I tried to find him. I'd heard he was working a cattle drive in Nebraska. I sent him a message. Told him where to meet me, just to see him, to tell him I was alive. He stopped. His jaw was working, his throat tight. It was a trap. The Pinkertons, they must have been watching him. They must have known I'd try. He rode into the valley, and they were waiting, on the ridge. He looked at Clara, his eyes black and bottomless. They shot him, right out of the saddle, just for being my brother, just for looking like me. I was a quarter-mile away, in the rocks. I watched. Clara put her hand over her mouth. I ran. Jesse finished, his voice dead. I've been running ever since. Running from them? Running from that. He looked at his own scarred hands. So, when you say I'm a coward, you're right. I am. I've been running for 7 years. The silence in the cabin was heavy, weighted with the body of a 17-year-old boy she had never known. Clara felt her own small, selfish justifications crumble to dust. Her fear, her loveless marriage. What was it, compared to this? No, she said. Her voice was shaking. You're wrong. I'm the coward. And she told him. She told him about her marriage, how he had accused her of being soft, and how he was right, but not in the way he thought. Alistair, he never hit me, she said, staring at her own hands. He was a gentleman. He never raised his voice. He just owned me. I was a painting he hung on his wall, something to show his business partners, something to prove he had taste. She told him about the coldness, about the nights she spent alone in a 20-room house, while he was in Cheyenne, or Omaha. On business. She told him about the threats. How, when she had spoken of wanting to visit her father's grave, he had smiled. He told me my father's reputation was fragile, that the mines had been in terrible debt, that he, Alistair, was the only thing standing between my family name and ruin. He said it so kindly. And I knew he would destroy my father's memory, just to keep me in line. Jesse watched her, his face unreadable. And then I found them, she whispered. The secret she had held for 3 years, a poison in her heart. Found what? The letters. I was in his study. He was gone. I was looking for, I don't know, something, anything. There was a locked box. I broke it open. She looked at Jesse, her eyes wide with the memory. It was all there. Letters from the sheriff, the old sheriff, the one who arrested you. They were talking about you, about how to handle you. And there were bank drafts, from Alistair's railroad account, payments, to the sheriff, to 2 other men who testified they saw you arguing with Thomas. The words were out, all of them. The truth, in all its ugliness. It was him, she said, the realization landing on her with its full, terrible weight. Alistair. He wanted the mine. Thomas was in the way. You were the perfect scapegoat. And you, Jesse said, his voice flat. What did you do? This was the moment, the final confession. I put them back. She breathed, the shame so thick she could barely speak. I put the letters back, I locked the box, and I did nothing. I was so afraid. He is, so powerful. I was alone. I had no one. I was a coward. She began to weep. Not the hot tears of frustration, but the cold, silent tears of a profound and bottomless self-hatred. Jesse looked at her, at this broken, terrified woman who wore the ghost of a silk dress, the betrayer, the victim, the woman who had married his enemy, and he finally understood. They were not jailer and prisoner. They were just two halves of the same tragedy, both of them broken by Alistair Finch. They sat in the quiet, the storm outside finally dead. The only sound was the drip of melting snow from the roof. Night fell. The cabin was warmer. Clara had made a thin gruel from the last of the flour. They ate in silence. The chain was still on her ankle, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer a punishment. It was just a fact. She was sitting by the fire, her knees drawn to her chest. He was sitting a few feet away, leaning against the wall, the blanket still draped over his shoulders. His frost-bitten hands were resting on his knees. He stared at his hand, the one that was swollen and red. Then, slowly, with a stiffness that was not just from the cold, he reached out. He did not grab her. He did not command. He simply laid his hand over hers, where it rested on the floor. Clara went utterly still. His skin was rough, calloused, and still cold, but there was a warmth deep inside it. His touch was hesitant, unsure. It was the first time in 7 years he had touched her with anything but violence. It was the first time in her marriage anyone had touched her with anything that felt like tenderness. It was a shock. It jolted through her, sharp and bright. She looked down at his scarred, battered hand, covering her own. She looked up at his face. He was watching her, his eyes full of a pain she now understood. "Is this," she whispered, her voice trembling, "part of my punishment too? Was this tenderness just another cruelty? Something to be given, only to be ripped away, leaving a fresh wound?" Jesse's jaw tightened. He looked at her, at the raw honesty in her eyes. He had no answer. He did not know what it was. He did not know this man, this gentle man who was touching her hand. He pulled his hand back, as if burned. He turned his face away, toward the fire, and said nothing. But the touch lingered. It hung in the air between them, a small, bright thing. Later, they tried to sleep. She was on the cot. He was on the floor. But neither of them slept. The air was too thick. The confessions of the day, followed by that single, gentle touch, had changed the shape of the room. She heard him shift. He sat up. She turned her head. He was looking at her. The fire was just embers, casting the room in a deep, red gloom. He stood. He walked the few steps to her cot. He stood over her, a shadow. She looked up at him, her heart a heavy, slow drum in her chest. He did not speak. He knelt beside the cot. He raised his hand, the one that was not frostbitten, and he touched her face. His thumb brushed the line of her cheekbone. "Clara," he breathed. It was her name, but it was also a prayer, and then he kissed her. It was not the sweet, shy kiss of the hayloft. It was a kiss of 7 years of starvation. It was desperate. It was rough. It was the kiss of a man drowning, taking his first breath. His mouth was hard on hers, demanding, and she met him. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to fist in his shirt, pulling him closer. It was a collision. It was all the grief, all the anger, all the loss, all the betrayal, melted down into one desperate, agonizing moment. It was not love. It was something more primal. It was need. It was two halves of a broken thing, trying to force themselves back into one. They clung to each other, the kiss deepening, becoming a raw, frantic exploration. And then, he was the one who broke it. He tore himself away, shoving himself backward, off the cot, onto the floor. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. "I can't," he gasped, his back to her. He scrubbed his mouth with the back of his hand. He was afraid. Not of her. He was terrified of the things she made him feel. The vulnerability, the softness, the part of him that was not an outlaw, the part that was not dead. He had given in, for just a moment, and it had nearly destroyed him. Clara lay on the cot, her lips stinging, her body shaking. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. The next morning, the world was new. The storm was gone. The sky was a brilliant, blinding blue. The world was buried in a clean, silent white. Jessie was on edge. The kiss hung between them, a charged and dangerous thing. He was cold again. His walls back up, but they were brittle. He unchained her ankle. "We need wood and water." He didn't look at her. He went outside, his revolver at his belt. Clara followed, stepping out into the bright, cold air. The snow was deep, up to her waist. The world was beautiful and deadly. He was at the edge of the small clearing, his head raised, his body tense. "What is it?" she asked. "Quiet," he commanded. He was looking at the ridge, a mile distant. The air was so clear he could see for miles. There was a speck, a black speck, moving against the white. "Get inside," he said, his voice a low growl. "What? Get inside, now!" He shoved her back into the cabin. Following her, he barred the door. He moved to the small, dirty window, wiping the grime away, peering out. The speck was a man, on a horse. He was moving slowly, his head sweeping the valley, searching. "Who is it?" Clara whispered, her blood turning to ice. "He's wearing a uniform." Jessie said, "A private one, gray and black." Clara's stomach clenched. "One of my husband's men." She breathed. "From the carriage. They're looking for me." Jessie checked his revolver, spinning the cylinder. He looked around the small cabin, his eyes landing on the heavy, overturned table. He righted it and shoved it against the door. He grabbed the trapper's old rifle, a rusty, single-shot thing, from the wall. "He'll be back," Jessie said, his voice flat. "And he won't be alone." Clara grabbed his arm, his good arm. "Let me go. Jessie, please. This is my fight. They're hunting me. Not you. I can lead them away. You can escape." He looked at her. His eyes were cold, but it was the coldness of a wolf bracing for a fight. It was the coldness of a man who had been running for 7 years and had just decided to stop. He put his hand over hers, where she gripped his arm. His touch was hard, possessive. "No," he said. "They're not just hunting you. They're hunting me. They have been all along." He looked back out the window. "You're not his, you're mine, and I don't give up what's mine." The silence in the cabin was a living thing. It was a cold, heavy presence that settled over them, thicker than the snow outside. The lone rider had vanished over the ridge, a black speck swallowed by the blinding white. But he had been there. He had seen the smoke from the cabin. He had seen the tracks Jessie left. He was a scout. Jessie had said nothing. He had simply walked back inside, kicked the door shut, and jammed the heavy bar across it. He moved with a new energy. The man who had been frostbitten and broken just that morning was gone. In his place was the outlaw, the predator. His eyes were clear and sharp, scanning every corner of the small room as if seeing it for the first time. "He'll be back," Clara said, her voice a dry whisper. "Not today," Jessie said. He was checking the rusty, single-shot rifle he'd found on the wall. He squinted down the barrel, then worked the lever with a grunt. It was stiff, but it moved. "He'll fetch his friends. They won't come in blind, and they won't come in the light. They'll wait. Try to take us at dawn." His certainty chilled her. This was his world. This was the language he spoke. "How many?" she asked. "1 scout means at least 2 others. 3 men. That's what I'd bring. Enough to surround a place. Not enough to be slow." He looked at her. The softness from the night before, the vulnerability of his confession, was gone. His face was a hard mask. "We have 2 guns," he said. "This rifle and my Colt." He unbuckled his gun belt, and in a move that stunned her, he held it out to her. "I can't," she said, looking at the heavy, dark-oiled leather, the polished wood grip of the revolver. "You can, and you will. I'm one-armed. My left side is still fire. This rifle is heavy. It's a distance weapon. I need to be able to aim. I need you to watch the window. And I need you to be able to kill the man who comes through that door. Because one will." He draped the belt over her shoulder. The weight of it was shocking. It pulled at her. A heavy, cold promise. I've never fired a gun," she whispered. "Then you'll learn fast." He took the revolver from its holster. He broke it open, spinning the cylinder. He checked the loads. 6 shots. That's all you have. Don't waste them." He put it back in her hand. Her fingers fumbled, cold and clumsy. Around the grip. "Hold it," he commanded. "Feel the weight. It's heavy. Good. That means it won't jump as much. Now, point it. Not at me. At the door." She raised it, her arm trembling under the strain. "Your arm is shaking," he said, his voice flat. "You'll miss. Use 2 hands." She brought her left hand up to steady her right. "That's better. Now, you don't pull the trigger. You squeeze it. Slow. Like you're squeezing a sponge. If you pull it, you'll yank the barrel down. You'll shoot the floor." He stood beside her, not touching her, but his presence was a wall of heat and intensity. "Don't look at the man," he said, his voice low. "Look at the center of him. Aim for the button on his coat. Aim for the buckle on his belt. Pick a spot, a small spot. Don't think about his face. Don't think about anything. Just that spot. Squeeze. And don't stop squeezing until the hammer falls." She swallowed, her throat dry. She aimed at a knot in the wood of the door. She squeezed. The click of the empty chamber falling was loud in the small room. "Again," he said. She did it. Again and again. She practiced pulling back the hammer for a faster shot. She practiced squeezing. She practiced until her arm ached and the smell of the gun oil was ingrained in her hands. "That's all I can teach you," he said. Finally. He took the gun, reloaded the spent chamber he'd used for her practice, and gave it back. "When the time comes, you won't think, you'll just do it." The afternoon bled away. The brilliant blue sky turned to a deep, cold purple, then to black. The tension was a wire, pulled so tight in the cabin that Clara felt she could not breathe. Jesse did not rest. He found the trapper's old axe and used it to weaken the legs of the crude table. He reinforced the door with the cot's heavy slats. He melted the last of the snow for water. He was a man preparing for a siege, preparing for his own death. Clara watched him. He moved with a grim, practiced grace. His bad arm was tucked tight, but his right arm was strong, the muscles cording as he worked. He was beautiful. In a way, a terrible, broken, and beautiful thing. He was going to die. He was going to die for her. The thought was an arrow in her chest. He finished his work. He sat by the fire, sharpening the trapper's knife on a flat stone. The shing, shing, shing of the blade was the only sound. The men were out there. She knew it. They were in the trees, on the ridge, huddled around their own small, smokeless fire, waiting for the first gray light. Clara moved. She did not know why. Her feet just carried her. She walked across the small room and sat on the floor, not beside him, but near him. He did not look up. He just kept sharpening the knife. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Good," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Fear keeps you awake. I don't want you to die." He stopped. The sound of the blade ceased. He looked at the knife in his hand, at the firelight running along the newly honed edge. "We all die," he said. "It's just a matter of when. And who's watching?" "Jessie." He finally looked at her. His eyes were dark, all the coldness gone, replaced by a deep, profound weariness. The outlaw was gone. The man was back. "They're out there. Clara, they're not going to leave. Not until one of us is dead. And Alistair Finch doesn't pay his men to lose." "Then let me go," she begged, the words tearing from her. "It's me they want. I'll I'll walk out. I'll give myself up. You can slip away. In the dark. They'll never see you." He stared at her. For a long, silent moment, he just stared. Then he reached out, not with his hand, but with the knife. He didn't threaten her. He just laid the flat of the blade against her cheek. It was cold from the stone. "You really still don't understand, do you?" he said. His voice was soft, and it scared her more than his anger. "You think this is about you? You think this is still your choice?" He put the knife down. "This stopped being about you 7 years ago. This started when he put my name in the sheriff's mouth. This was always his and mine. You were just the prize." He leaned in. He was not the man who had kissed her last night. He was not the boy from the hayloft. He was something new. "He's not taking you," he whispered. "He's not taking you." He raised his hand, the one that was red and raw from the frost, and he touched her. His fingers, rough and calloused, brushed her jaw. He leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the night before. This was slow. It was deliberate. It was a claim. His mouth was firm, and it tasted of cold air and smoke and something that was just him. He kissed her with the certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose. He was not asking. He was taking, and she gave. She surrendered. All the fear, all the guilt, all the years of her cold, empty marriage. It all broke. She opened her mouth to him, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. She pulled him closer, and the kiss changed. It became what it had been before, a drowning. He pushed her back, gently, onto the rough floorboards, onto the bearskin pelt that lay there. He moved over her, his body a heavy, warm weight. She looked up at him, at the face she had loved, the face she had betrayed, the face that was now her only salvation. "Jessie?" she breathed. He didn't speak. He lowered his head and kissed her throat. His beard was rough against her skin. He was rough. His hands were not gentle. They were possessive. He gripped her waist, his touch hard. He was hurt. He was one-armed, but he was stronger than any man she had ever known. This was not the soft, fumbling affection of a boy. This was the desperate, focused passion of a man who had been starved for 7 years. He tore at the remnants of her silk dress, and she helped him. She pulled at his shirt, wanting to feel his skin, and then they were bare. In the flickering, dying light of the fire, she saw his body, the scars, the whip marks, the puckered bullet wounds, the new, angry red of the frostbite. She touched them. She traced the long, jagged line on his ribs with her finger. He flinched, but he let her.
"They hurt you," she whispered. "They didn't break me," he said, his voice thick. He looked at her body, at her, Clara, the woman he had dreamed of, the woman he had hated. She was not the girl he remembered. She was thinner, harder, but she was real. He lowered himself to her, and she wrapped her legs around him, pulling him in, taking his weight. There was a moment of pain, a sharp intake of breath. She was unused to this. Her marriage had been a cold, perfunctory duty. This was a violation. This was a revelation. But then the pain was gone, replaced by a slow, building heat. He moved, his rhythm slow, then rough, then beautiful. He clung to her, his face buried in her hair, his breath coming in harsh gasps. They were not two people making love. They were two souls clinging to each other on the edge of a cliff. It was a fight. It was a prayer. It was the only answer they had left. He cried out, a raw, broken sound, his body arching, and she held him. She held him as he collapsed, as the last of his strength poured into her. They lay tangled, their bodies slick with sweat, the air in the cabin cold on their skin. The fire was almost out. Dawn was coming. She held him, his head on her chest, his breathing ragged. She stroked his hair, damp and wild. "I never wanted to be owned," she whispered, the words surprising her. They were a truth she had not known until this moment. "I hated him for it. I hated my father for..."
For giving me away." He raised his head, looking at her, his eyes dark and questioning in the gloom. "But I'm yours," she said. It was not a surrender. It was a choice. It was the only choice she had ever made. I don't want to die, Jesse, but if I do, I want to die as yours, not as his." He understood. He understood the savage, terrible logic of it. This world, their world, was one of brands and claims. He had called her his prisoner. He had called her his bride. Now, she was making it true. She looked at the knife, the one he had sharpened, lying by the hearth. "Mark me," she whispered. His eyes widened. "Clara." "Please," she begged, her voice fierce. "I don't want to go into this as Alistair Finch's wife. I want to go in as your woman. I want a mark they can all see, a mark he will see. If he finds me." This was her rebellion. This was her final act of freedom. He looked at her, his heart breaking. This magnificent, broken, brave woman. He took the knife. He did not heat the whole blade. He stuck just the very tip of it into the heart of the embers, holding it there until it glowed a dull, angry red. She sat up, pulling the threadbare blanket around her waist. She turned, offering him her shoulder. "Here," she said. He knelt behind her. He could feel her trembling. His own hand was shaking. He had hurt her. He had chained her. But this was a sacred, terrible thing. "It will hurt," he rasped. "I know." He took a breath. He pressed the glowing tip of the blade to the smooth skin of her shoulder. She screamed. It was a short, sharp cry, muffled as she bit down on her own hand. The smell of seared flesh filled the small cabin. He held it for 1 second, 2, then he pulled it away. It was done. A small, dark mark. An X, a simple, brutal claim. She slumped, leaning back against him, her body shaking, tears streaming down her face. He dropped the knife and wrapped his arms around her, his good arm and his wounded one, holding her tight, as if he could absorb her pain. "I never," he whispered, his voice thick. "I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't," she wept, turning, burying her face in his chest. "You saved me." They held each other as the first pale, sickly gray light of dawn began to creep through the cracks in the cabin walls. It was time. They dressed in the cold. Their movements were slow, stiff. They did not speak. He handed her the revolver. She buckled the belt around her waist. It was loose, but it held. He took the trapper's rifle. He checked his pockets. 4 cartridges. That was all. He looked at her. He touched her face, his rough thumb brushing her cheek. "Stay away from the window," he said. "Don't fire until you see them. Until they're in the room. Aim for the center." "Jesse, where are you going?" "They're waiting for us to come out, or for the light. I'm not going to give them the choice." He gave her a hard, quick kiss. "Bar the door behind me." "No!" she cried, grabbing his arm. "No, don't leave me. We fight them. Together. They're 3. We're 2. And one of us is you." His voice was not cruel, just honest. "They'll fire the cabin. They'll smoke us out. The only chance is to break them before they break us. I'm going to draw them out, separate them. It's suicide." "It's a chance," he said. "It's the only one we have." He touched the new brand on her shoulder, his fingers gentle. "You're my bride now. Remember?" He opened the door. The gray light flooded in. He slipped out, a shadow moving into the trees, silent as a ghost. Clara rushed to the door, her heart hammering. She did as he said. She barred it. She ran to the small, dirty window, her revolver clutched in both hands. The world was gray and silent. The snow was a deep, undisturbed blue in the pre-dawn light. Nothing. And then, a crack. The sound of the rifle. It was sharp, and it echoed through the valley. It came from the ridge, to the west. A pause, then a reply. A different gun. Pop, pop. A shout. A man's voice, cursing. Then Jesse's rifle again. Crack! Clara pressed her face to the glass, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the gun. She saw movement. A man, running between the trees, away from the cabin, toward the sound of Jesse's rifle. He had done it. He had drawn them away. Another shot. Pop, pop, pop. A pistol. Then nothing. Silence. The silence was worse than the gunfire. It stretched. 1 minute. 2. Clara could not stand it. She tore the bar from the door, her breath sobbing in her chest. She had to know. She ran out into the snow, into the freezing gray air. She held the revolver up, her eyes wide, scanning the trees. "Jesse!" she screamed. The sound of a branch snapping. Behind her. She spun. A man, not 20 feet away. He was dressed in the gray and black uniform. He had a thick beard, and his eyes were cold. He was the one who had stayed behind. He had been waiting for her. He raised his pistol. Clara forgot everything. She forgot to aim. She forgot to squeeze. She just pointed the gun and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The gun kicked in her hand, slamming her wrist back. The shot went wide, kicking up snow 6 feet to his left. The man smiled, a cruel, slow smile. He took his time. He aimed his pistol at her chest. Clara looked at him. She saw the button on his coat. She raised the gun with both hands. She pulled the hammer back. She found the button. She squeezed. The shot was true. The man looked down at his chest, a dark, blossoming stain appearing on the gray wool. He looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise. He did not smile. He fell, face first, into the snow. Clara stood, the gun smoking in her hand, her body numb. She had killed him. A groan. She turned. "Jesse!" She ran toward the sound of the gunfire, plunging through the deep drifts, falling, getting up, her lungs on fire. She found him. He was at the base of a large pine, slumped against it. There was another body, a man in a gray coat, lying in the snow a few yards away. Jesse was alive. He was holding his leg. His hand was soaked in blood. "Jesse," she wept, falling to her knees beside him. You came," he rasped, his face pale, his lips blue. I killed him," she said, her voice numb. "The one at the cabin?" A faint smile touched his mouth. Told you you'd learn." He looked at her, his eyes full of a love and a pain that was so deep, it stole her breath. "Clara!" And then his eyes rolled back. His body went limp, his head lolling to the side. He collapsed, sliding from the tree into the snow. "No," she whispered. The gun fell from her hand. "No, Jesse, Jesse!" She grabbed him, pulling him up, cradling his head in her lap. The snow around his leg was turning a bright, terrible red. "No, you can't!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. "You can't leave me! Not now! Do you hear me? You can't die!" She rocked him, her tears falling hot on his cold, pale face. She held him, his blood soaking into her torn dress, the brand on her shoulder burning like fire. "I love you," she wept, her voice breaking, the words a desperate, broken confession to the silent, watching trees. "I never stopped loving you." He was not dead. The pulse under her fingers was a faint, thready flutter, a small, stubborn bird beating its wings against a cage. His leg was a ruin. The bullet had gone clean through his calf, shattering the bone, and he was bleeding. A dark, steady ooze that was melting a crater in the snow. Clara moved. The numbness that had frozen her after she fired the gun shattered, replaced by a white-hot, singular focus. She would not let him die. She had not come this far. She had not killed a man to watch him die in the snow. She ripped a long strip from the dead man's wool coat. She bound Jesse's leg, high above the wound, pulling the knot so tight she heard him groan, even in his unconsciousness. A tourniquet. It was all she knew. She had to get him back to the cabin. She looped her arms under his, and she pulled. He was a dead weight, all 180 pounds of him. She slipped, fell, her feet finding no purchase in the deep snow. It was impossible. She looked at the horses. The 3 men had come on horseback. The animals were tethered in a small aspen grove, hidden from the cabin. She ran. She grabbed the reins of the largest, a steady-looking bay, and she led it back, forcing it through the deep drifts. She did not know how she did it. She did not know where the strength came from. But she hauled Jesse, limp as a sack of grain, up and over the saddle, laying him stomach down. She tied his hands to the stirrups and his feet to the saddle horn. A grim, reverse lashing. She scavenged. She took the guns from the dead men. She took their ammunition. She took their heavy coats, their canteens, and the saddlebags from their horses, which held coffee, hardtack, and jerky. She had killed them. Now, they would keep her alive. She led the horse back to the cabin. Jesse's body a terrible, limp burden. She got him inside, onto the cot, and then, her hands shaking, she lit the fire. The next 10 days were a new kind of hell. They were a blur of blood, and fire, and pain. Jesse's leg, she knew, was a mortal wound if she did not clean it. The bone was broken. The infection was already setting in, the skin around the bullet holes turning a dark, angry purple. She took the trapper's knife, the one he had used to brand her, and she heated it in the fire. She found a half-empty bottle of whiskey in one of the men's saddlebags. When Jesse woke, his eyes wild with fever, she was ready. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, her voice a flat, hard thing. She poured the whiskey over the wound. He screamed, a raw, terrible sound that echoed in the small cabin. She gave him the bottle. "Drink." He drank, his eyes screwed shut. "And bite," she said, jamming a strip of leather between his teeth. She had to set the bone. She pulled, her entire weight against his, until she felt a wet, gruesome thunk. He passed out. It was a blessing. She worked for hours. She dug out fragments of shattered bone. She cleaned the wound again, with the last of the whiskey. She stitched the torn flesh, using a small needle and thread from her own ruined dress. She splinted the leg with 2 slats from the broken table, binding them tight. She nursed him. She fed him broth made from jerky. She kept him warm with the dead men's coats. She sat by his side, the revolver in her lap, and she watched him fight. He was a creature of iron. He had survived prisons and whips and frostbite. He would survive this. He had to. On the 11th day, his fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear. He looked at her, then at his leg, splinted and bound. "You're a tolerable nurse," he rasped. "And you're a terrible patient," she replied. They left the cabin 2 days later. Jesse could not ride, not properly. They took 2 horses. She rode one, and he sat slumped on the other, his splinted leg propped up, his hands clinging to the saddle horn. He was weak, his face pale and gaunt, but he was alive. They traveled south, into the high desert, away from the railroad, away from the territory of Alistair Finch. They rode at night, hiding during the day, 2 ghosts moving through a landscape of canyons and sagebrush. They spoke little. The intimacy of their violence and their passion had left them raw. There was a new, fragile bond between them, a thing neither of them dared to name. They came to a town. It was not a town, really. It was a collection of adobe huts and tents, huddled in a box canyon, a place called Purgatory. It was an outlaw town, a place where men with no names came to spend their money, a place where the law was a $30 bounty, and the sheriff was the man with the fastest gun. They were a hard sight. A man, pale as death, barely able to sit his horse, and a woman in a dead man's coat, her silk dress in tatters beneath it, a brand new revolver strapped to her waist. No one gave them a second look. They found a room, a small, windowless box above a saloon. Clara sold one of the horses for coin. She bought food. She bought laudanum for Jesse's pain. She bought him a new shirt and a new coat, and for herself. She bought a pair of men's trousers, a canvas shirt, and a hat. She looked at her reflection in the mercantile's cracked glass. The woman in the silk dress was gone. This new woman, with her hair tucked under a hat, the brand on her shoulder burning beneath the canvas, looked hard. She looked like she belonged. Jesse recovered. His body, honed by years of hardship, mended itself with a fierce stubbornness. He began to walk, first with a crutch, then with a limp. The lines of pain on his face softened. He watched her, his eyes following her as she moved around the small room. One night, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, checking his revolver, the old, familiar ritual. "Alistair," he said, his voice quiet. "He won't stop." "I know," Clara said. She was sitting by the small, cold stove, cleaning the rifle. "Those men, they were just the first. He'll send more. He can't let you go, and he can't let me live. So we run," she said. "We go to Mexico, or Oregon. We change our names." He shook his head. "I've been running for 7 years. Clara, I'm tired of it." He looked at her, his eyes dark. "You told me about a ledger, letters, a locked box in his study." Clara went still. "Yes, that's it," he said. "That's the only way. Not running. We go back. We get that box. We get that proof. We expose him. We don't just run. We win." She stared at him. Go back to the place she had run from. Go back to the man who had tried to have her killed. It was madness. "Jesse, we can't," she whispered. He's a king there. The law, the railroad, the bank. It's all his. We'd never get within a mile of the house. And even if we did, what? We show a ledger to a sheriff he owns? I don't plan on showing it to the sheriff." Jesse said, "There's a federal judge in Cheyenne, an appointee. A man named Harlan. They say he's clean. They say he hates the railroad. If I can get that ledger to him, it might be enough." He was planning to go alone. He was planning to leave her here, in purgatory, where she was safe. "No," she said. He looked up. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no," she said, standing. She was a different woman now. The woman who had killed a man. The woman who had set his leg. "You're not going without me. This is not your fight, Jesse, not anymore. It's our fight. He tried to kill me. He framed you. He murdered my brother. I'm not running. And I'm not hiding." She walked over to him, standing over him. "You'll never get in, not without me. You don't know the house. You don't know the routine. You don't know him. But I do. I lived there. I was his pretty, stupid, silent wife, and I know exactly how to get into his study." He stared at her, seeing, for the first time, the woman she had become, the steel in her spine, the fire in her eyes. It was the same fire that had burned in him for 7 years. "Alistair will be in Cheyenne," she said, her voice dropping, her mind already working. "He has a winter manor, just outside of town. It's where he does his business. He'll be there now. The house will be full of guards. His men." "So how do we get in?" Jessie asked, caught up in her sudden, fierce energy. A cold, hard smile touched Clara's lips. It was a smile that would have terrified her husband. "You," she said, "are a new hired gun. A man with a fast draw and no questions, looking for work. Alistair is always looking for men like that. And you?" "I," she said, "am the repentant wife, the foolish, scared woman who ran away, realized she had nowhere to go, and has come back, begging for forgiveness." She looked at Jesse. "He'll believe that. His pride won't let him believe anything else." The journey to Cheyenne was cold. They rode hard. 2 travelers, a man with a limp, and a woman dressed as a boy. They sold the second horse for a stagecoach ticket for the last leg. It would not do for her to ride into town with a strange man. She arrived first. She took a room at the hotel. She bought a dress, a simple, gray wool dress, the dress of a humbled woman. She washed her face. She pinned her hair. She looked, once again, like Clara Finch. She went to the manor. It was a fortress of dark stone and cold glass. Perched on a hill overlooking the town, it was a house built on blood money. She walked up to the front door. The guard, a man she recognized. His eyes widened in shock. "Mrs. Finch, I am here to see my husband," she said, her voice a perfect blend of fear and exhaustion. Alistair Finch was in his study. The room was dark, paneled in mahogany, a huge fire roaring in the hearth. He did not get up when she entered. He was sitting behind his massive desk, a glass of brandy in his hand. He was just as she remembered, impeccably dressed, his hair perfectly combed, his eyes as cold as a winter sky. He was not surprised to see her. "So," he said, his voice a soft, dangerous purr, "the little bird has come home to its cage." "Alistair," she breathed, playing her part. I got lost. The carriage. I was so afraid." "Save it." He cut her off, his voice sharp. "I know about the accident, and I know about the dead men in the mountains. My men." He stood, walking around the desk, his movements slow, like a stalking cat. "And I know about him, the outlaw, Jesse Caron." Clara's blood ran cold. "Did you think I was a fool?" he hissed, his face close to hers. "I've known he was alive for years. I've had men hunting him. He was a loose end, and now he's your lover." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You've been a busy woman, I must say. I'm disappointed. I thought you had better taste." He slapped her. It was not a brutal blow. It was a cold, precise, stinging slap that rocked her head to the side. The first time he had ever laid a hand on her. "You will stay in your room," he said, his voice calm again. "You will not leave. We will decide what to do with you, and as for your lover, he's a dead man." Jesse arrived an hour later. He walked right up to the front gate, his limp pronounced. "Name's Cole," he said to the guard. "Heard Mr. Finch is hiring. I'm good with a gun." He was searched, his revolver taken. He was led to the study. Alistair Finch was waiting. "You're the man who's been asking questions." Alistair said, "Just looking for work." Jesse said, his eyes scanning the room. "I have a job for you." Alistair said, "There's an outlaw, a killer named Caron. I want him found. There's a $500 bonus." "I've heard of him," Jesse said, his voice flat. "Good. Then you'll know him when you see him." Alistair smiled. "You can start tonight. My men are sweeping the valley. But first, a drink." He poured 2 glasses of brandy. He handed one to Jesse. Jesse took it. He looked at the dark liquid. He looked at Alistair, and he smiled. "I don't drink," he said, and he threw the brandy, glass and all, into Alistair's face. The room exploded. 2 men, who had been standing in the shadows by the curtains, lunged. They were not expecting the man with the limp to be fast. Jesse moved. He dropped, his bad leg folding, and he swept the other leg out, taking one man down. He rose, his right hand a blur, and he drove his fist into the throat of the second man. It was over in 3 seconds. 2 men were on the floor, gasping. "You," Jesse said, "should have hired better men." Alistair, wiping the brandy from his eyes, just laughed. "I did," he said, and he pulled a small pistol from his desk drawer. At that moment, the door burst open. It was Clara. She was not in her room. She had been listening. She held the revolver she had hidden in her skirts, the one she had taken from the dead man in the snow. "Get away from him, Alistair," she said, her voice shaking, but her hands steady. Alistair looked at her. He looked at Jesse. He smiled. The happy couple. How touching. "It's over." Clara said, "I know what you did. I know about Thomas. I know you framed him." "Of course you do, my dear," Alistair said, his voice bored. "You were never as stupid as you pretended." "But it doesn't matter." He raised his pistol. "No one will ever know." He fired. Not at Clara. At Jesse. Jesse dived, the bullet splintering the door frame where he had been standing. He was unarmed. Alistair was between him and the door. Clara screamed. Alistair turned the pistol toward her. "And now, my dear, your part in this tragedy is over." He aimed. Clara fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed room. Alistair looked down, a small, dark hole appearing in the white linen of his shirt. He looked at her, his eyes wide, not with pain, but with a profound, cold surprise. You shot me," he whispered. He stumbled, falling back against his desk. He began to bleed. Clara ran to Jesse, her hands checking him. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he said, grabbing one of the fallen guard's guns. Alistair was on the floor, leaning against his desk, a dark pool spreading around him. He was smiling, a bloody, terrible smile. "Heh," he coughed. You think you've won?" "It's over," Clara said, her voice shaking. "It is," he wheezed. You were right. The boy, Thomas, he was a fool, stole from me. So I cleaned the slate, and your outlaw, he was just so perfect, a perfect, angry fool." He coughed, blood speckling his lips. He would have taken the fall. If he hadn't run, he was confessing. He was dying, and he was bragging. "And you," he looked at Clara. "My greatest disappointment." His eyes went blank. His head fell to the side. The room was silent. Then, shouting. The sound of boots on the stone floor outside. The door flew open. A man in a dusty suit, with a tin star on his chest, stood there, the new sheriff. Behind him, 3 deputies, their guns drawn. They took in the scene, the 2 dead guards, the body of Alistair Finch, the most powerful man in the territory, dead on the floor, and standing over him, a woman with a smoking gun, and Jesse Caron, a known outlaw, holding a gun of his own. "Drop them," the sheriff said, his voice hard as iron. "Drop the guns. You're both under arrest for the murder of Alistair Finch." The trial was not a trial. It was a hearing, convened the very next day. The town was in an uproar. The judge was a hard, old man, the federal judge, Harlan, the one Jesse had been counting on. The room was packed. Jesse stood in chains, his face grim. Clara, in her gray dress, her reputation in tatters, was called to the stand. "Mrs. Finch," the judge said, his voice booming. "This is a simple matter. You and this man, this outlaw, were found over the body of your husband. What say you?" Clara stood. She looked at Jesse. He met her gaze, his eyes steady. "You're my bride now." She took a breath. And she told the truth. She told them everything. She told them about her brother. She told them about Jesse and their young love. She told them about Alistair's frame-up. And then she told them about herself. "I knew," she said, her voice ringing in the silent room. "For 3 years, I have known my husband was a murderer. I found letters. I found a ledger." "A ledger?" the judge interrupted. "Where is this ledger?" I went back to the study. After they arrested us, I told the sheriff I needed my things." Clara reached under her shawl. She produced a thick, leather-bound book. He was a meticulous man. "Your Honor." He wrote down everything, every payment, every bribe, the payments to the old sheriff, the payments to the men who lied. "It's all here." She handed it to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. The judge opened it. His face grew dark as he read. "And you," the judge said, his eyes hard on her. "You knew this, and you said nothing." "I was a coward," Clara said, her voice breaking, but she did not weep. "I was afraid. I was his property. I did nothing. And this man, this good man," she pointed to Jesse. "He lost 7 years of his life. He was beaten. He was hunted, all because of my husband's greed and my silence." The room was dead quiet. "My husband tried to kill Mr. Caron last night," she said. "He ambushed him. He confessed to the murder of my brother, and then he tried to kill me. I shot him. It was not murder. It was defense. He was a monster. And I am as guilty as he is. For my silence." She looked at Jesse, the tears finally coming. "I love him, Your Honor. I have always loved him. He is not a killer. He is a victim. I am the one who should be on trial." The judge was silent for a full minute. He looked at the ledger. He looked at Clara. He looked at Jesse, standing in his chains. "Jesse Caron," the judge said. "Sir," Jesse said, "these 7 years, They're a stain on the law, a stain I cannot wash away." He closed the ledger with a heavy thud. "This book, this testimony, it is enough. The evidence against Alistair Finch is overwhelming. His confession, though convenient, seals it." He looked at Clara. "Madam, your silence was a sin, but your testimony today, it was an act of courage, one that has cost you everything." He turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff, release the prisoner." The room erupted. The sheriff, stunned, unlocked Jesse's chains. Jesse stood, his hands free. He did not move. He just looked at Clara. The judge slammed his gavel. "Justice in this territory," he boomed, "has long been delayed, but by God, it will not be denied. Not today. This hearing is closed." Jesse walked, his limp pronounced, through the crowd. They parted for him. He walked to Clara. She was weeping, her hands over her face. He touched her arm. She looked up. He did not speak. He just held out his hand. She took it, and, together, they walked out of the courtroom, into the cold, bright light of a new day. They did not stay in Cheyenne. They walked free from the courthouse. But they were not fools. A judge's ruling could not erase 7 years of reputation. To the law, Jesse Caron was a free man. To the railroad, and to the men who had worked for Alistair Finch, he was a loose end. And Clara was a pariah, the woman who had killed her husband and run off with an outlaw. They took what little money she had, bought 2 horses and a pack mule, and rode west. They did not stop. They rode past the reach of the telegraph lines, past the last settlements, past the high plains and into the spine of the mountains. They rode until the world that had tried to break them was nothing but a bad memory, a dull ache in the wind. Months passed. The spring thaw gave way to a high country summer, full of sharp sunlight and the smell of pine. They found their place, a hidden valley, tucked between 2 gray, granite peaks, watered by a creek that ran clear and cold. The land was hard, but it was clean. It was beyond the reach of railroad law. It was beyond the reach of any law but the seasons, and their own will. They built a cabin. It was small, just 1 room. The logs felled and hewn by Jesse, the gaps chinked with mud and moss by Clara. It was rough, but it was theirs. The woman who had worn silk now wore canvas trousers and a man's shirt. The man who had been a ghost now had substance. He still limped. The bullet in the snow had seen to that. His leg had healed, but it had healed crooked. It was a permanent reminder, a knot in the wood. Clara stood outside the cabin, hanging their clothes on a line strung between 2 young aspens. The sun was warm on her back. She was humming, a small, quiet sound she had not made in years. She paused, her hands resting on a wet shirt, and she looked down at the slight, firm swell of her stomach. She was pregnant. The sharp, steady thwack of an axe echoed from the edge of the clearing. Jesse was laying in firewood for the winter. He worked with a steady, powerful rhythm, his bad leg braced, his good arm swinging the axe. He had his back to her, and she watched the play of muscles under his shirt. She saw the pale, cross-hatched lines of the whip marks, still visible through the fabric. They both carried scars. He stopped, as if sensing her gaze, and turned. He wiped the sweat from his brow with his forearm. He did not smile, not often, but he looked at her. He looked at her, and at the cabin, and at the line of washing. It was a look of profound, weary peace. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement of their new, quiet life, and then he turned back to the wood. This was their freedom. It was not a grand, ringing thing. It was quiet. It was the absence of fear. It was the sound of an axe, the smell of clean water, and the knowledge that the only person who would come through the door was the one she had chosen. That night, they sat by a fire outside the cabin. The high-altitude air was cold. The sky a vast, deep black, littered with so many stars it seemed to buckle under the weight. The silence was immense, broken only by the snap of the fire and the distant, lonely call of an owl. They spoke of the past, as they often did, not with the fire of their old accusations, but with the quiet curiosity of two survivors comparing maps. "Do you ever miss it?" Jesse asked, his voice a low rumble. He was staring into the flames. The warmth, the soft beds, the easiness of it. Clara looked at her hands. They were resting on her lap. They were not the hands of Mrs. Alistair Finch. The skin was chapped, the nails short. A small, healing cut on her knuckle from the skinning knife. She had never liked her old hands. They had been useless, white, pampered things. "I miss nothing," she said. "That house was a tomb. I was a trophy he had won. I was owned. Jesse, by him, by my father, by the whole town and what they expected of me." She looked at him, this man who had chained her to a stove, who had, in his own rage and pain, declared her his prisoner. His face was calmer now, the lines of hate eased by time and by safety. But he was still Jesse. He was still the man who had been forged in iron and ice. "I never thought," she said softly, the words a confession she had only just realized herself. "I never thought being yours could feel like healing." Jesse turned his head. His eyes, reflecting the fire, were full of a deep, aching tenderness. He remembered the words he had thrown at her in the trapper's cabin. "You're my bride now. And this is your punishment." He had been so sure. He had been so full of a righteous, broken rage. He reached out, his calloused, scarred hand covering hers. His thumb brushed her rough knuckles. "You were never my punishment, Clara," he replied, his voice thick. "I thought you were. I spent 7 years fueling myself on what they took from me. And what I thought you let them take, I thought hurting you would somehow make me whole." He shook his head, his gaze locked on hers. "But you were what kept me alive. The memory of you, even when I hated it, even when I hated you, it was the only thing, the only part of me they couldn't beat, or starve, or whip out of me." He leaned in. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, starving kiss of the storm. It was not the fiery, possessive kiss of the battle. It was a kiss of arrival. It was slow, and deep, and sure. It tasted of wood smoke, and the cold night air, and a future that was, for the first time, truly theirs. They held each other, wrapped in a shared blanket, listening to the high, thin moan of the wind as it moved through the pines. It was the same wind that had tried to kill them, but here, in their valley, it just sounded like the world turning. Later, they went inside. The cabin was warm. The small stone hearth Jesse had built held a low, steady fire. Hanging from a wooden peg driven into the logs beside the hearth was a single, dark loop of rusted metal, the old iron cuff. He had gone back for it. After the trial, before they left Cheyenne, he had ridden for 3 days, back to the ruined trapper's cabin. He had found it, still looped around the leg of the cold stove. He had chiseled it free and brought it with him. It was a reminder, a symbol of their past, of the cold, and the pain, and the rage. It was a testament to the brutal, savage way their love had been reforged. It hung there by the fire, unused, a relic of a punishment that had, by some miracle of the hard, unforgiving West, become a salvation. It was no longer a chain. Thank you for listening to our story. We'd love to know where you're listening from, so please leave a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this tale of the West, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one. We appreciate your time, and we'd love to hear your thoughts.